Tuesday, December 20th. The items on the agenda tonight have been warned. There's several items that posted online. They include 162 Cumberland Road, 47 Harrison Avenue, 89 Chestnut Terrace, 20 Pine Street, and sketch plan 284 Grove Street. I want to talk first about the agenda with the board. As the chair, I have the ability to adjust the agenda, and I'd like to do that, and I'd like to talk to you about how to do that. 20 Pine Street is an extremely complicated project with pretty high legal issues at play. We have a very full agenda tonight and a very full set of participants. And I want to make sure they're given the full amount of time and an adequate opportunity to present their cases and arguments on this. I know people feel very passionately about it, and it's a development at the center of the city that I think a lot of people care about. So what I looked at our rules of procedure, and I know Jeff is recused on this, so, but I see that he joined us, so this is good. I looked at our rules of procedure, and I can refer something to a special meeting. And I think we should do that for 20 Pine Street. And here's what I would propose to do. And I'd like to get the DRB's feedback on it. And the applicant is here, and so I'm going to ask them for their feedback as well when I get through this. I think we should open the agenda item tonight. Ask the applicant if they are available on January 11th or January 18th for a special meeting only on 20 Pine Street, so that we can dedicate a meeting to this and that the parties can present to us, where it is tonight. I think given the other items on our agenda and given the time of year it is, I think it's challenging for us to give it its full attention it deserves. And I'd like to set it for a special meeting, which we can do on more than 24 hours notice, but I think we deserve to have it set for enough time so that people can accommodate that. We have a lot of communications in the record from the public. We can accept all of those into the record. If public can't make the next meeting, they can write to us and we'll take those into the record. I also would like to use this time to speak to our counsel and get some feedback on, I think, some pressing legal questions about the application of 24 VSA 4413A to this project. So I'd like to know what the DRB thinks.
I think it makes a lot of sense. It's a big issue. And I think, all of the agenda items on any given night are really, really important. This is going to take a while. There's going to be a lot of thoughtfulness that needs to go into it, a lot of thought. And I think we want to allow everyone who wants to discuss the issue with us to have the time to do it. And I think we're human. And by the time we address that item tonight, we're going to be tired. So I think it is one of those kinds of cases that makes sense to give it its own special hearing.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think how you organize what happens tonight and how it gets organized for that sort of meetings is sort of a question, as there are probably people here tonight that wanted to participate. But I agree that separating it out, because we have issues that I agree that we want some feedback on the legal side of it. We want to hear from the applicant. We also want to hear from the public. And I think it is more than we can get done responsibly tonight.
AJ, what parts did you want to open and address tonight versus move to the special meeting?
As my initial thought was to ask the applicant to address 24 VSA 44, but in thinking about it today and sort of chewing on it, and as I approached this, I'm wondering whether it doesn't make sense to just call the whole thing to a special meeting.
That would be my vote, my recommendation. I hate to kind of bifurcate out issues to different meetings. I think if we're going to address it, let's address it all at a meeting.
I do question whether we ought to give the applicant.
Yeah. So that's
what they want to say, have some conversation and then, but move the bulk of it to to the special meetings. And there may be more than one meeting.
Yeah, and there may be. I mean, there's a lot of feedback that I've read through, and there are issues that I think we need to discuss as a board and that we need to get some counsel on.
Well, one of the questions is, if we open it enough so that we can do we have a mini deliberative so we can raise those questions and ask for feedback from the city attorney, our own counsel on this thing? Because we don't have any way to officially ask for that without opening the hearing, I believe.
Right. Probably true. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Scott, who's here for the applicant?
John Callow and a number of other folks are here on the applicant team.
I'll ask because I can't see. Oh, let me also add that one of the major considerations behind this is, and as of January, we are going to be moving to primarily in person. And I think this agenda item in particular would be much better heard in person, as all of them will be. But in particular, it is very challenging for an item with a lot of participation to do it without video technology, without the seeing everybody and seeing the entire applicant team. So I think there's real value as well. I guess John was signed as the applicant. I'll let anybody from the applicant team speak and share their comments, having heard the board. And I would also appreciate knowing whether or not January 11th or January 18th would be better for them.
Can I pipe in with a critical detail? January 18, the room is already booked. The 11th, it's available. I've tried to check for Contois and I can't check it. But Pine Street is available on the 11th, not the 18th.
Like the 18th, do the board members have any problems with that? With the 11th, I'm sorry.
It's fine with me.
I have no problem with the 11th. Is Pine Street going to be large enough to hold the folks that are going to want to come down and talk?
I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
What I was feeling too is there's probably going to be enough participation that the auditorium would be better.
I agree with that and can't tell you why I can't see that room's availability on Outlook, but I can't.
Memorial Auditorium's empty. We could use that.
I think the doors are locked.
They are. John has his hand up. So let's hear from John and Jim.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, John.
You swear him in, AJ?
I'm not going to swear him in because he's not offering testimony at this time.
Okay. Thank you for being here tonight. We are prepared to move forward with our application tonight. Yes, there is a lot of discussion and passion around this particular application, but it's really a pretty straightforward application. And we've been at this a while, and we're ready to move forward now. What's your pleasure?
Jim, Mr. Langen?
Yeah, I would just I would agree. I would agree with John that this is a straightforward application. We don't view the legal issues as being overly complicated and have agreement for the most part with the city attorney on this, who's reviewed this with staff. I know that there are a number of people who will want to speak to this, and we will certainly listen to them, but do not see this as something that would require more than one meeting for you to hear what people have to say.
I'm going to disagree with that. So I appreciate that, but that
I can't hear AJ.
Right.
I can tell you that we are disagree with that. So I appreciate that. What does the board think? My inclination is as follows. We will open it. We will ask the applicant to give us a 30-minute presentation. We will decide what we want to do at that point, whether or not to continue it to a special meeting on January 11th or not.
We didn't get feedback from either John Carlo or Jim Lankin about their availability on the 11th.
I understand that. They did not offer that.
Well, it'd be hard to have the meeting continue without their participation.
I would agree with that.
AJ, did you want to keep it where it is on the agenda with that 30 minutes, or did you want to move it?
I did want to move it. I want, if they are, very prepared to go forward and think it is as simple, then I'll give them 30 minutes to present on it. Knowing full well that I think it's in the best interest of this DRB that we take some time to think about it and continue it to a special meeting on the 11th. But I do respect their desire to at least open it and present it to us.
Okay. Sounds like a plan, AJ.
Okay. So what I would do is move that up to the first agenda item on the public hearing.
You want to do it before consent?
No, I want to do consent. That's easy. Okay. So the first agenda item we have is our consent agenda, ZP 22-590. It is 162 Cumberland Road. Kristen McBride, John McBride, convert existing 14x14 tool shed into home office hobby space to teach and repair saxophones. Do we have the applicant with us?
Let me take a look, AJ. There's
Okay.
a lot of folks to scroll through. Let me do it this way. If you're the applicant on this item, can you raise your hand? Oh, there we go. Perfect.
Hello.
We have John McBride here.
John, how are you?
Good, thanks. I'm glad to hear all these people aren't here to debate my saxophone shed.
So this has been marked as our consent agenda item, which means staff has reviewed it and think it can be approved without a public hearing. Do you have a copy of the staff report for this item?
I do.
Project? Do you have any issues with it?
I do not.
Are there any members of the DRB that would propose to treat this as a consent agenda item? No? Okay, then I'll entertain a motion to approve ZP 22-590.
So moved.
I'll second that.
Brad, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I just want to make a comment that it's wonderful to have a little shed that's maintained and reused, and with all the things that we've torn them down and everything else, it's wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's then go to our public hearing tonight. We've moved ZP 22-576 20 Pine Street up to agenda item number 1. I know the applicant is here. And I can't see this, but can I get all those in the audience who'd like to speak on this item for the applicant to raise their right hand?
So AJ, it's going to take some time to enable everyone to speak. Do you want me to do that before we do swearing in? Just the applicant team, all the public?
Just the applicant team at this point.
Okay,
AJ, I'm recused from this matter, so I'm going to turn off my
And
video.
I want to say that we will give the members of the public time to speak on this. That is part of the reason we have discussed moving this to a special item. We know there's a lot of public interest in this, and based on the comments we've received, and we want to hear them. But the applicant has said that they would like to go forward, at least present their project tonight, and we're going to give them the opportunity to do that.
okay, so applicant team, I know some of you, but if you're on it, please raise your hand so I can enable you to speak. Okay. So we have Meg McGovern, Jim Langan, John Callow, Steve Donahue.
Anybody else? Nope.
Not for the applicant team now.
Okay, so raise your right hand and say, I hereby swear or affirm that the evidence I give in this cause under consideration shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth under the pains and penalties of perjury. I do.
I do.
Scott, do you have the plans for this that you can pull up while they open and present? I guess, John, you're going to present.
Yes.
Okay. Take it away. And it's 5:19. I'll give you till 5:50.
Okay. Good evening. My name is John Callow. I'm representing the applicant. Let me just get back to where I was. The Cathedral Immaculate Conception Charitable Trust. And could you please reduce that image, please?
What do you mean reduce it? Take it down?
Yeah, just for a second. There. So just I'm representing the owner of the property at 20 Pine Street in the procurement of a demolition permit from the city. Jim Langan, a local attorney, will speak to the legal issues associated with the demolition permit application. And in addition, Monsignor Peter Routhier, spiritual leader of the parish, he's available to speak to the context and the motivations behind the application. Just a quick background. The demolition permit was filed on October 27th, which consisted of a cover letter from the Monsignor describing the scope of work, which includes the removal of the building and foundation, bell towers, sidewalks, and landscaping. It also was accompanied by a legal memo from Mr. Langan, as well as a schematic site plan and photographs. On November 4th, at the recommendation of the zoning administrator, the scope of work outlined in the application was amended to remove the landscaping from the demolition scope of work and to add the parking lot to the demolition scope of work. On December 13th, the applicant appeared before the design advisory board at the referral of the zoning administrator. And on 12/14, the applicant received a copy of the staff report to the DRB. The applicant has since added 2 documents to the application file, including an updated legal memo from Jim Langan, dated 12/16, that he'll discuss with you, as well as a copy of a letter from the Monsignor to Preservation Burlington that was dated 10/28/2022. And so here we are. While the path to this hearing has been somewhat fraught and complicated and in our opinion, distracted by several issues, including historic significance, current use, whether the fact that the mass is no longer set in the facility has some relevance to the current use, zoning use of the property. This application is actually quite straightforward. And I think maybe at this point, the best thing to do is let me turn it over to Jim Lang, can address sort of the legal theories associated with the application. Jim?
John, before you turn it over to Jim, I have a couple of questions for you.
Okay,
Just be clear about the scope. This is just for the demolition of the existing building, correct?
it includes, and maybe Scott, if you want to now put that photograph back up there. What you're looking at is just a Google map photograph.
Yep.
And if you scroll down a little bit, the 20 Pine Street scope of work, the scope includes the demolition and removal of the church structure and the adjacent pedestrian sidewalks. That's, number one, right? Demolition and removal of the existing parking lot. That's to the west of the church and identified as number two. And then number three in the lower right-hand corner is the existing bell tower. Now, and not to steal Jim's thunder, but originally we had the landscaping, the grove of honey locust trees that was included in the scope of the demolition scope of work. And the zoning administrator reminded us that under section 4413, in that landscaping is a component that can be regulated by local zoning ordinance, so that if we were being consistent with using 4413 and the limitations that it involves, that we needed to remove the landscaping from the demolition scope of work, which is what we've done. Does that answer your question, AJ?
It does. That this application would only approve the demolition, and that's all that's been applied for at this time.
You have everything that's shown on and enumerated in 1, 2, and 3.
It sort of begs a follow-up question, AJ.
Yeah.
Is once you've demolished everything, what is left? Are you just going to have it a pile of debris, or?
No, it'll be removed, and the parking lot will be loamed and seeded. Same thing with the foundation hole for the structure itself will be filled and seeded, as well as the removal of the sidewalks.
Okay.
Is there a plan for redevelopment at this time?
Not at this time, no.
And I guess the other question, just to get it answered, is why not wait until redevelopment to do the demolition?
That's at our prerogative.
Okay.
That's not to be, it's not, it's outside the scope of this application.
Okay.
You were turning it over to Jim. Any other board members have questions for John? Okay, Mr. Langen?
Thank you.
Yep, thank you, John.
Let me mute here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Can I be heard?
Well, I put mine. Put yours on.
We could hear you and then you started to echo, Jim.
I think you got to raise your hand and be recognized.
Yeah, Jim, we can hear you clearly.
I don't think he can hear us.
Scott, are you getting to recognizing Jim?
We can hear Jim. Jim and John, are you in the same room? I feel like we're getting feedback from when both of your mics are on.
a good example for in-person meetings.
Yeah.
Jim, you're recognized if you can unmute yourself.
No.
Yeah, but
Maybe we want to go to a different part of the presentation while we get this worked out.
Meg and Steve were both here.
right. Am I audible?
Yeah,
Yes.
Great, thank you. Sorry about that. So thank you, John. Thank you to the chair and the board and staff for your review of the parish's application. As John mentioned, we have submitted 2 legal memos along with this application. The first submitted with the application and the second in response to the staff report. I'm not planning to sort of read through every point of those memos right now, but do want to just highlight a couple points from them. First, that there is no genuine question as to whether Section 4413, the state statute limiting a municipality's zoning authority over religious organizations, applies to the parish's application. The staff memo concurs on this point after consultation with the city attorney. And as cited in my initial October memo, there's one case in Vermont that interprets Section 4413 as applied to a religious institution, and it is in the context of a demolition permit application for a vacant church building. And the court in this case ruled that a city is unable to assess the historic attributes of the vacant building or any other attributes not reserved to the city by Section 4413. This case also makes clear that Section 4413 is the vehicle by which Vermont ensures compliance with the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, RLUPA, a federal statute protecting religious institutions from zoning laws' undue interference with religious exercise. And federal RLUPA case law makes clear that the act of demolishing a church to complete its deconsecration is a religious exercise under RLUPA. I also just wanted to note in the second memo, I do highlight our differing views regarding the path upon which the staff has put the review of this application. However, since Section 4413 applies regardless of the review path, we believe that the result of this hearing should be the same, and that consistent with the recommendation of the staff memo, that the parish's application should be granted. I could respond to questions now. I do also want to introduce Monsignor Ruthier from the parish, who is with Meg McGovern, Scott, if you're looking for that name. But before he speaks, if there are questions for me.
Jim, the case you spoke about in your first legal memo.
Yes.
Is that Vermont Baptist Convention versus Burlington Zoning Board 159 VT 28?
No.
Okay.
That's
Which is the one you were referring to?
Val San Giacomo.
Oh, Val San Giacomo. Okay.
I have a question, AJ, if I.
Yeah.
Okay. So just to help me understand, obviously, this property has significance within the city and with many people in the city, not just with the Catholic Church. So it's a big deal, and I think you must understand that. Given that there's alternate ways to deconsecrate this property, why are you choosing this particular approach?
Well, I think that's best answered by the Monsignor, but I think the general answer is that that's to the religious organization's discretion of what they think is best, what this parish thinks is best for its parishioners. Monsignor can speak to that, but that's a religious organization's decision.
That's a hard one, only because obviously a lot of parishioners are citizens of Burlington, and the sentiment in Burlington may be quite different than that. And it's not, yes, how the church chooses to do it is obviously up to the church. Like I said, why this way and not another way is, maybe we can understand that. Thank you.
So Jim, I want to understand correctly that even though it shall cease to be a church, 24 VSA 4413A subsection, what is it? C or whatever, that A2 or whatever that says churches. Even though it shall cease to be a church, it is still under 24 VSA 4413, a church once demolished. It does not have to be rebuilt as a church to stay within the protection of 4413.
No, it does not. It's permitted as a church, and also this action is a religious action. So there are two reasons for that application of that statute.
And religious action is what RLUIPA covers essentially.
Right. It says exercise. Right. It uses the term exercise.
And that was the genesis for 4413. Even though the statute doesn't say religious exercise, it should be read to include any religious exercise.
I don't know if it's the origin, but it is as the case cites, it's the way 4413 is the way that Vermont enforces RLUIPA.
Okay. And so I'm correct that your position is the historic review then can't apply as a matter of law.
That's correct. That's one of the one of the arguments. We also think that the zoning ordinance is clear as to what of what a historic building means in Burlington, and that in Burlington a building would need to be at least 50 years old to be subject to the section of the statute dealing with the demolition of historic buildings. That the plain language of the statute is clear on that. But that's before you would even apply 4413.
Talk to me about, so that we have a record, unless the DRB has other questions on this issue. Why don't you endeavor to just explain to us your historical arguments, as to historical review, if it were to apply, just because it's been raised, it's been raised. There's obviously questions about it. Take some time and walk us through that.
So walk us through what 5.4.8 of the ordinance says.
Well, your second legal memo, which sort of addresses more issues on historic review and why historic review is not relevant, those issues. Why it's not a historic building for purposes of section 5.4.8.
That's in the first memo. And
well, your first memo is the 27th. Okay.
Yes. So that memo is clear. That memo lays out, section 5.4.8 says that it applies to historic buildings, and historic buildings are those that are listed on a registry or eligible for listing. And then goes on to say that a building may be deemed eligible for listing if all of the following are true. And among the list is that the building is at least 50 years old. And the church is not 50 years old.
When was it built?
I believe it's 77.
The zoning permit, Scott referenced in his staff report, AJ, I believe it's October of 77.
So even though it's obviously architecturally significant, it is not listed, and it is not, in your view, eligible for listing because of its age.
It's not eligible for listing for purposes of Burlington zoning regulations. For purposes of interpreting section 5.4.8, which is clear as to what, for a building to be considered historic for purposes of it, for this section, the section is clear as to what it would need, what threshold it would need to pass. And one of those thresholds is its age.
All right, I do have a question about Valsan Giacomo, if you have a moment.
Okay.
Wasn't there parish-related redevelopment also occurring as part of the demolition?
Yeah, I don't think they were discussing the plan for redevelopment. Yeah, I think there was.
That differentiate the case?
Well,
if the church was being demolished and to replace it was a different religious use building, would that distinguish the issues here?
Not for purpose. The discussion in the case is about whether a historic ordinance could be applied to this convent, whether they could consider that and prevent its demolition. It wasn't a discussion. It didn't. The discussion wasn't about what it was being replaced with. It was about whether it could be demolished. And so, the redevelopment, of what it's being replaced with, wasn't, in the decision-making, or at least in the, the decision that I read.
Okay. Are there any board members that have questions for Mr. Langen besides myself? Brooks? Brad? I lost my screen. Nobody?
I guess I would like to get, and I know maybe the staff has had that already, but this is where we talked before. I would like to have the city attorney give us feedback on some of these issues and be able to talk to her about these to get that point of view and just have our questions to her. I think it's more appropriate to ask those questions to city attorney than to Mr. Langen.
Okay, I don't disagree with that. Jim and John, is there anything else you want to add now tonight?
Yeah, I believe the Monsignor would like to speak.
He's more than welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Okay. Thank you for taking the moment to hear me speak. I'm Monsignor Peter Ruthier. I'm presently the rector of the Cathedral of St. Joseph, but I had also been a rector of the Immaculate Conception. At the time, we had two cathedrals at that point. So I have been part of this process, but not all of it, but now at this nearer end, but I have been involved in diocesan level work or parish work for over 44 years. So the church does not take this very lightly, neither does the parish here. I was rector here at Immaculate Conception, and then I was away for 5 years in other services and returned a year and a half ago. But this has been part of the discussion. Parishes are always very important, and when we have to close them, the way that we do the best healing is by removing the building, the structure, so that the memories are memories of a building that was used with great joy and thanksgiving for all the events that needed to take place. For many people in Burlington, that building was the former Immaculate Conception building that burnt in 1972. And those are their memories. This new one, there are memories for other people that were involved in there. But at the same time, to see a building, especially a cathedral, to not be used any longer, since it just does not meet the needs of the parish in Burlington at this time, the best is for it to be removed. That was stated very clearly. This has to be deconsecrated. The structure has to go in order for that healing and wholeness to take place. This has been discussed by parish councils, by the parishioners that are still actively involved in the church. And we need to always keep that in mind. It's the appropriate avenue for us to be doing. And it's not taken at all lightly. I'm very much aware of the memories people have, the emotions that are tied to this. But as a church that is alive and meeting the needs of the community, we did not need 2 cathedrals, and we needed our larger building to function for the events in our service. And that this served its purpose, and now it needs to be demolished in order to progress for the good of all the people, not only of our faith community, but I presume for the good of the city of Burlington. I don't know if that answers. There's much more that if one looks at the history, it's very complex in regards to this. But this is where we are, and I don't want to take all that time. I have a lot of the history involved with these buildings, but you don't want to be here all night. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So with that, what I would like to do is continue this to open the floor for us to receive public comment on what the applicant said, and for us to meet with our council. Obviously, there's been discussions that we haven't been part of, and I think we may have questions that we want to hear directly. I'm sure the applicant wants us to get this right, and I'm sure that the neighbors and the other interested parties want us to get it right, and we want to get it right. So I would move that we continue this to a special meeting on January 11th at 5 p.m.
645 Pine Street.
645 Pine Street.
I'd second that.
All those in favor? Aye. All right. Thank you.
Question for you, AJ. Do
Sir.
we need to do anything formally to solicit feedback from city attorney, or is that just inviting her to that meeting that will?
I think we can call an executive session to do that under our rules of procedure.
Okay. Thank you.
Ask what time the meeting is?
5:30.
5:30?
5.
5?
Yes.
5 p.m.
And if there's any members of the public that can't attend, please provide your comments in writing, identifying where you live and whether and your concerns or interests about this project. Before that, we will take those into the record then. All right, moving on. The next agenda item is 47 Harrison Avenue, ZAP-22-6. Heel of zoning denial to replace existing windows with vinyl units. Do we have the applicant here?
That would
You
be
have-
Tim Ely. Tim
Yep.
Ely.
Mr. Ely, can you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm that the evidence you give in this proceeding, this cause under consideration shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth under the pains and penalties of perjury?
So Tim, I've enabled you to speak. If you can unmute.
Okay. Does that work?
Yes, that works. So this is an appeal of a denial. This is Mary, I believe this is your project.
Yes, it is.
Typically, when there's an appeal of denial, we ask the city to go first and outline the basis for the denial. And so, Mary, if you would please do so, I'd appreciate that.
Certainly. 47 Harrison Avenue is half of a 2-unit structure. It's a little unusual in the Lakeside District, but some of these units are individually owned, although the units are attached. There was work going on at 47 Harrison Avenue, which the building official issued a stop work order as no permits had been requested or issued. 2 permits were applied for, one to replace the vinyl siding with fiber cement board clapboard, and 1 permit was to replace the existing vinyl windows with new vinyl windows. The permit for fiber cement board was approved by staff. There had been an existing building permit for vinyl siding issued in the 1980s. Although there was no zoning permit, it's our practice to recognize the issuance of a building permit that far back because there was not open communication between the divisions, and the building official frequently issued trades permits without assurance of a zoning permit. So we did have a record that the vinyl siding had been approved. The windows, however, never received zoning or building permits. The applicant can give testimony when the work was done. There appears to be evidence that these have been in place more than 15 years, so they would be allowed to be retained. However, there's no gravity on additional review for the acceptability of vinyl windows if they couldn't be approved under today's standards. Our standards and guidelines for replacement windows on historic buildings was updated in April 2022. We don't recognize the vinyl windows there as being appropriate. The windows that were installed in the 80s never received a zoning or a building permit. This is a National Register district that was listed in 1982, and vinyl windows are not an acceptable replacement on historic buildings. So the permit was administratively denied. The appeal was timely, and that's why it's before you today. This is an after-the-fact permit. The work was interrupted by the stop work order.
And so, Mary, if I'm correct in understanding you, there's a 15-year sort of statute of limitations issue baked in here, that if the windows vinyl as they were in place for more than 15 years, the city's position is that they can remain vinyl as was replaced this year. Do I have that right?
The city's position is you don't get to keep that approval. There was no approval. So
Okay.
those units that were installed in the 80s, they could remain as they were. However, that doesn't translate into an approval for the material, and today's standards would not find these acceptable.
So you couldn't replace them?
You could not replace them with vinyl.
I would have,
Go ahead, Brad.
so isn't part of the ordinance so that you can replace materials with the same kind of material when you're doing
It
renovation?
was never approved in the first place.
Yeah, but if you had potholes in that area, you could repair them, right?
different situation.
So if one of those windows fell out, whatever, 2 years ago or a year ago, and that window had been there for 25 years as a vinyl window, the owner, he in this case, or any person, would have to replace that, could not go buy another vinyl window from Lowe's and pop it in. They'd have to go buy a historic matching window.
You would have to go by the regulations in effect at the time you do the work.
Which in this case would be you say are the April 22 guidelines.
Correct. As there are no previous permits for window replacement here.
Any board members have any more questions for our staff?
I guess the other question is that this is half of the building, and the other half of the building has vinyl on it right now, which I assume also doesn't have permits. So we're sort of accepting that they'll be not matching what's existing in the building.
I'm only looking at the property that's under consideration with the application.
Okay.
I guess the one question that I have, Mary, is like, these were replaced somewhere around 1989. Was there a requirement at that time that there be a zoning permit to replace windows?
Under the ordinance in effect, that was a 1987 amendment. This was a design control district. So yes, there was a requirement for window permits.
So the city couldn't enforce a violation against the windows, but could say, hey, if you're going to replace them, they've got to come up to historic standards, correct?
I make no determination on the length of time they've been there. The evidence from the reval photos suggests they were replaced in the 80s, but with no permit record here, permit or window replacement would require using the regulations and guidelines we have today.
And I guess just to clarify that, are clad wood windows acceptable, or they have to be wood windows?
Under the guidelines from last April,
yeah,
there are a variety of options, but vinyl is not one of them.
I know you included that in the staff report, the image.
It's at the bottom of that image.
Oops, wrong one.
Those are the guidelines that were issued last April.
If you scroll down, Scott, at the bottom, it says the materials. Yeah, wood, clad wood, and fiberglass.
Yeah, but what about that last sentence? What does that mean? Typically, vinyl windows do not meet the standard. It doesn't seem like a very clear, they'd never meet it. What are the standards that are applied to that typically? You may be muted, Mary.
Our experience is that vinyl windows have not been acceptable. The Design Advisory Board was the author of this document.
So have vinyl windows ever been approved under the historic guidelines?
For additions on historic buildings, we have sometimes seen them for new construction, excuse me, but not in historic structures. There are examples, and I've mentioned this in the staff report, there are some of the residences in the Lakeside neighborhood that have vinyl windows because earlier permits have been issued. And I mentioned one on Central Avenue. There was an earlier permit that approved vinyl windows, so when they chose to replace them, they could do so with vinyl.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify what provision, sorry, the replacement window guidelines for historic buildings. Are they specifically referenced in the zoning ordinance?
This particular document is not referenced. This is a policy that was adopted by the Design Advisory Board after much discussion.
Okay.
Isn't there language about the Secretary of the Interior standard?
There are within our standards a window for using modern materials when within our standards, and there was no articulation to that. So we frequently had property owners and retailers coming to us and saying, well, what does this mean, more modern materials? So, excuse me. This seeks to articulate what those modern materials are that are acceptable.
Anybody else? Any questions for Mary?
I think that one of the reasons that vinyl have that designation is because of the way they're manufactured to be installed. They end up with they look like a flatter plane on the plane of the wall, whereas they're just not amenable to casings and sills and aprons and so on that are typical to historic buildings. I think that's one of the reasons why it's difficult to get them to emulate the historic look of that type of window in that kind of building.
A hard one, Sean, because there are buildings or windows that are just held in by the exterior trim without any setback at all. So it's not always the case.
Yeah.
You have a recess.
Well, I should couch my answer in that some clad windows, their cladding material is vinyl. So it's not completely excluded. And we, for many years, would only allow a wood core window and allow cladding. And that was a decision that was agreed to by the Development Review Board. I remember Glenn Jarrett was the one that articulated it. So that was the caveat at that time for window replacement. I would note again that this subject property, 47 Harrison Avenue, is that the window casings have all been cut off. And that was something that I asked the gentleman that was working on the house about the window casings. Were they going to be replaced? And they're gone.
I guess that begs the question, Mary, is there a requirement to replace other materials besides the windows as they're redoing the exterior of this house?
The permit for the siding replacement to convert vinyl to fiber cement board, that's been deemed by Superior Court to be an acceptable replacement on historic structures. Although, as I mentioned, there was a building permit to put the vinyl siding on in the first place, so there was much greater latitude. There in the application was no mention of replacing the trim around the windows. Again, most of the work was already done. As you can see, that picture was just taken on December 9th.
Mary, there's a note numbered 5, distinctive materials, features, finishes, and construction techniques are examples of craftsmanship that characterize a property. You say the original has 4-2 fenestration and now it's being replaced by 1-1 vinyl. If the applicant were theoretically to replace the 1-1 vinyl with 1-1 wood, it sounds like it still would not meet the standard because because ideally it would be in a 4-2 pattern. Do I understand that correctly?
Well, the 4-2 pattern was the original pattern of the windows in this neighborhood. Admittedly, by the reval photos, I don't see a 4-2 pattern in this property. The narrative in the National Register District alludes to a description of another building that it duplicates, where the windows did have the 4-2 pattern, and that was characteristic of this worker housing neighborhood.
So are you saying you would, like, any approvable replacement window would have to have 4-2, or you don't have enough evidence to hold them to that standard?
I would say that I don't have enough evidence at this point.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to hear from the applicant. I understand Mr. Ely, is that right, is on?
Yes, he's on.
Okay. Sir, I know you filed your appeal and you've heard our discussion with Mary. What would you like to say about that?
And he's muted.
I've asked him to unmute. Just waiting. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, so my son, he does construction for a living. That's what he does. And he just had the wrong information that he could fix all the rot around the windows, which there was, I mean, all the windows were badly rotted. And he thought that it was okay to change the windows without the permit, because that was the advice that he gotten. When I said that those windows were, and they were changed in '89, because in '89 they did have the wooden ones. We had the vinyl siding put on, the contractor did. And he's one told us that even then the windows were all rotted. And we bought the house in '89. And like all the top windows were screwed in just to hold them up because they were in bad shape. So after the siding was put on, then we had a contractor come in and then change all the windows, which was change to vinyl. Now, just recently though, we have some rot that was around. The windows were still a little rot. I think the siding was put on wrong, but the windows were rotted, and he just got into fixing the windows, and then he replaced the windows. And he did replace it the same size, everything. He just took out the old window, and then he put in the new vinyl windows. Yeah, so he didn't know until of course Mary seen him, and then that's when she had stopped him, and then he had stopped all the work until we got the permit for the siding.
Did you look into, once Mary identified the issue, did you look into what it would cost to find conforming windows, or how hard it would be?
My son did, and it would be very hard and very expensive, more than I can afford. I don't have that kind of money.
When you say hard, what do you mean by hard?
To find them, to find the size, and I guess they would have to all be special made.
Any GRB members have any questions for Mr. Ely?
Do you know specifically, like even ballpark, the cost difference for?
Well, my son he didn't really do a lot of research. He just did some research to see what it would, just to get an idea what it'd be, and it would be like close to $1,000 for each window. And plus all the labor to go ahead and put it all back in.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I mean, like I said, he was doing all this work because I mean, it was all rotted. It had to be done. I do plan on retiring in a couple of years. And I just want to have all this work done before that time because I don't want to be using my social security check to be doing house repairs. So.
Okay.
AJ, I have a quick question for.
Yeah, by all means.
Are these windows, do they have muntins in them? Or are they just clear glass or is there any muntin pattern with them?
No, they're just clear glass.
Were the old ones also that way?
The vinyl ones that we took out, yes. The vinyl ones that we took out, these are the exact same thing.
And do these match what your neighbor has in the other half of the house?
My neighbor has the same exact windows that we do.
Well, I don't have any further questions for the applicant, and I would propose that we close this hearing item. Any objection to that? All right.
To doing what you said?
So, Mr. Ridley, we're going to close the public hearing item. We're going to close testimony on this agenda item. The board may deliberate on this tonight. Depends on how long the next item takes and what the board wants to do. During our deliberations, we reach a decision, hopefully, maybe sometimes, and then we'll get a decision out to the parties shortly thereafter.
So AJ, do you want to solicit public comment?
Oh, I'm sorry. I looked. I didn't see. Are there any members of the public here to speak on this item? I didn't see anybody with their hands up, but
yeah, we didn't ask either. I just figured we should.
yeah.
All right. If you'd like to speak on this item, raise your hand.
Usually people raise their hand.
Yeah. Okay. I don't see anyone.
Yeah. Okay. Oh,
well.
Nope. All right. Nobody. Okay. Then it is closed. Bye.
Okay.
All right. So the next agenda item is 89 Chestnut Terrace, ZAP-22-8. Appeal of zoning.
Before we do that, maybe we should remind folks, it seems like there's still a lot of attendees that we've moved on from the 20 Pine Street project.
Yes, that's true. We did move on from the 20 Pine Street and continued it to a meeting on January 11th at 5 p.m. So if you're here for that, it will be continued to January 11th at 5 p.m. So we were calling ZAP 22-8, 89 Chestnut Terrace, appeal of zoning determination recognizing 89 Chestnut Terrace as a separate lot from 41 South Street. And do we have the appellant here?
Yes, we do. We have Arline Duffy as the appellant.
Okay.
We also have
we have a number of parties,
representative
right?
for the owner.
And that is, so does anybody, if anybody wants to speak on this application, could they raise their right hand? And state that I swear or affirm the evidence I give in this cause under consideration shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth under the pains and penalties of perjury.
I do.
I do.
Yep.
So this is an appeal of a zoning determination, and we, in appeals, we ask the city to go first and explain their reasoning. I have sort of an initial question for staff.
Sure.
The scope of the request and the factors under consideration seem to me to strain our legal authority. They seem to be asking us to review deeds and survey lines and make determinations based on things that are not the CDO. So recognizing a lot or not a lot seems to me like a question of deed interpretation, not zoning. And I'm wary of our jurisdictional limits here.
Hey, sorry to interrupt, AJ. Before anybody answers, it looks like Gravel and Shea is on there, so I'm going to recuse myself from this matter.
Okay, bye, Brooks. So, Scott, with that question, perhaps being something you discussed first, what happened here?
Well, so you're right. It gets into looking at land records and surveys and deed language. We get requests for determinations periodically. Most of the time, they're about seeking recognition as a pre-existing nonconformity. But it's I'll say fairly common to get these existing lot determinations as well. And a lot is a thing in the ordinance, and it carries with it certain rights, 2 lots versus 1 lot. In this case, the owner sought recognition as 2 lots versus 1. And you're right, in making that determination, we look at stuff in the land records, the surveys, the deed language, what the assessor's records show. So you're right, we look at stuff outside of zoning to inform a decision that is founded in the zoning ordinance. In this case, is it a lot or 2 lots?
Okay.
AJ, the city attorney is here now too.
I understand that. And I may ask for Kim's guidance on this as well. But Scott, why don't you walk us through your reasoning and then I'll raise this question with Kim.
Sure. Just do a quick screen share so we know what we're talking about. So this is the property. This is 41 South Street. This is 89 Chestnut Terrace. And to be clear, this is the current tax map, what it looks like online.
Yep.
So the owner of the property sought a determination recognizing this property as 2 lots as opposed to 1. And there were a couple twists and turns, as you've seen. My initial determination was based largely on review of the zoning permit record, which included 2 boundary adjustments with surveys that showed these 2 lots as 1. So issued an adverse determination initially, because we tend to rely on survey as being the definitive reference for lots and boundary lines.
Mm-hmm.
That was appealed by the owner, and it was scheduled for board review. Digging further into the record and outside of zoning, into the assessor's records, the Sanborn maps, the deed language, the picture began to shift towards this was subdivided as 2 lots originally. It showed up as 2 lots through the Sanborn maps, and the deed language consistently refers to 2 lots. So land surveyors are not infallible, and it seems like the surveys for those 2 boundary adjustments incorrectly showed it as 1 lot. I think significantly, the requested lot line adjustments in those 2 permits had nothing to do with merging 2 lots. It was about changing the boundaries between neighboring properties a little bit here and there. So I followed up with the owner and said, gee, I think, or the owner's representative, I said, I think this actually shows this as 2 lots, and understood that there's some ambiguity in the record. But again, zoning 101, ambiguity is decided in favor of the property owner. Everything else points to this being 2 separate lots. So a revised determination was issued. That initial appeal was dropped. But we have an appeal filed of that revised determination by Arline Duffy, which is before you tonight. So that's the quick overview. There is basis to say this is 1 lot, and that's pointing to those 2 surveys, but everything else points to it as 2 lots.
Okay. Kim, do you have some commentary about the limits of our jurisdiction, given what, our authority to look at deeds and things and interpret them?
No, I for these purposes, I mean, you're making a determination regarding whether this is 2 lots for zoning purposes. And so I think as far as looking back at like the subdivision, the prior subdivision, and even deeds in that context, not necessarily for the purpose of the, the precise lots or the conveyances and such, but looking back at it for those purposes, I think it's within your realm, within your scope.
Okay.
AJ, can I ask Kim another question?
Of course.
Kim, I think the appellant raised a question about jurisdiction and whether the zoning administrator had the authority to revise their opinion while it was on appeal. Do you have any thoughts on that particular argument?
I think that when new evidence is brought to light, that the administrative officer can consider that and reconsider his opinion. Yes.
And does anything need to happen to, it feels like something I've seen more come up from an appeal from, DRB to the E-court. It's not like we have a remand process for the zoning administrator to say, hey, I'd like that decision back so I can think about it further. I'm trying to understand that component of the argument.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's typically the same that happens with the board as far as basically requesting, reconsideration. Even the board can do it. Usually there's a request put into the board to reconsider. In this instance, new evidence was brought to light, and therefore it made a determination to reconsider. Ultimately, it's before the board now. So
okay.
Process-wise, you can make that determination of what's the ultimate outcome.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. We have a number of folks here.
AJ, should we hear from the person who filed the appeal?
Yeah, I'm getting to that. There's a couple people with their hands up. So I lost my participant screens. Scott, who was it? It was Gravel and Shea, but was it Jeff? Is that you?
No? Gravel and Shea, it's Zach.
Yeah.
Okay. So who do we have on behalf of the appellant that wants to speak?
We have Arline Duffy and we have Mary Twitchell with their hands up.
Okay. Arline, do you want to go first?
Yes, I don't know who Mary Twitchell is, but she's not representing me.
Okay.
Yes, I'd first like to just follow up on the discussion about jurisdiction on appeal. And I would point the board to the case that I cited in my original statement, which talks in detail about the zoning board, a decision by the zoning board and its appeal to a DRB, and that there is no jurisdiction once the appeal's been filed, regardless of whether there's new evidence. The decision has to be heard by the DRB. And there's constitutional due process reasons why. If I hadn't looked on the website within 15 days, I would have lost my right to speak on the original question, the September 6th, because I didn't receive any notice that a new decision was being made, had been issued. Even though Mr. Guston and Ms. O'Neill both spoke with me about this case after the September 6th matter, and they knew that I wished to participate in the original appeal by the landowner. So there's a real reason why the rule applies, that once an appeal has been filed, the zoning administrator should not be making a new decision that is not communicated to anyone, because rights are lost of the adjoining landowners. So I just want to just follow up on that point. I really think that I've submitted plenty, and I don't want to belabor the issue, but I think that the most relevant issue here is the zoning permit that was issued to my predecessor in title, Linda Gibson, and Mr. Boix-Vives in 2002. That zoning permit permitted the boundary line adjustment. It said between 41 South Street and 32 Chestnut Terrace. And the map that was associated with that showed one lot. There is no adjoining boundary between 32 Chestnut Terrace and 41 South Street, unless 41 South Street is one lot that encompasses lot 89, which was the original lot designation from when the neighborhood was laid out. There's no address that is 89 Chestnut Terrace in Burlington. In fact, I checked the E911 database today for the state of Vermont. There's no such address. So, the ambiguity is, it appears in my own title. So when Mr. Guston says that ambiguity is to be resolved in favor of the landowner, there's two landowners here, and my title and my zoning permit says that I did a boundary line adjustment with 41 South Street. That could only be possible if the lots had merged. Otherwise, the zoning office in 2002 should have rejected the application and said that it should have been for 89 Chestnut Terrace. But since that lot didn't exist anymore and had merged with 41 South Street, the application moved forward. I think those are probably the 2 points that are most salient, and I just most wanted to highlight. I think that there's in both the zoning administrator's report and in Mr. Berger's submissions, there's a lot of reference to, minor errors, or this is an internal boundary line, or they're dismissed, but they are facts. And I don't think you can overlook those facts in making the determination that these lots merged. In fact, Mr. Boix-Vives in 1975, and I know you don't have the original deed in the record, but there were 4 parcels of land. And those 4 parcels have now somehow merged into 2 on the tax maps and 1 in the zoning office. So there's just been a lot of mistakes, I think, and not paying attention over time. But at this point, I think it's clear in the land records and in the zoning records that there's one lot, and it's known as 41 South Street. And I thank the board for listening.
Arline, can I ask you a couple of factual questions?
Sure.
The 2 maps that were supporting the lot line adjustments, looks like one of those benefited your property and the other one was for a separate boundary line adjustment.
Right.
Do you know who prepared those? Were they prepared by and for the owner of 41?
As they're labeled, that appears that way, Jeff. They say that they're for Laurent Boix-Vives and they're prepared by Trudel.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I have to step out and go lock my office front door. There's something going on. I'll be right back. Caitlin, if you want to take this, or if you guys just want to give me 60 seconds to pause. Sorry.
Are there any other questions for Arline? On the board? Okay. Thank you, Arline. And then Mary Twitchell, you were looking to speak as well. If you unmute yourself. Actually, sorry, I'm realizing I should go to Gravel and Shea next, right? Appellant, then the property owner, then public comment. Is that right, Scott?
Sure. And Zach is unmuted.
Zach, do you want to share your position and that of the property owner?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Zach Berger, and I'm here representing the applicant, the landowner here, Janine Boix-Vives. And first, to respond to AJ's initial comment that, you know, there is some strained legal authority and that this is diving into the land records, surveys and whatnot. We had reached out. I mean, the whole process and the whole reason for applying for this determination was our client is attempting to sell 89 Chestnut Terrace. And so we had first reached out to title insurance to lay out everything, the deeds, the surveys that are out there, and see what their opinion was. And we did receive a confirmation from Andy Michael that they would insure 89 Chestnut Terrace as it appears in the materials that we have submitted as its own individual property. And we wanted to file this determination just to ensure from the city's perspective, there has been no municipal action to merge the lots. And to address the procedural issues that have been raised here as well, from our perspective, it's essentially moot. We are here in front of the DRB, and that would have been the case any way you cut it. We had initially appealed the initial adverse determination, and that would have brought all of us to the DRB to have this precise conversation. And Scott had reissued a redetermination in our favor, and we are once again still at the DRB. So any of those procedural issues we view as moot. And we would like to express our support for the department's determination that 89 Chestnut Terrace and 41 South Street are two separate lots. As the permitting department correctly noted in their affirmative determination, the deed history, the original subdivision plats, and the grand list all depict two separate lots. As noted by the appellant and as noted in the initial adverse determination, there are these two boundary line adjustments that have occurred. And as we pointed out, both of those boundary line adjustments modify external lot lines as opposed to the internal boundary between 89 Chestnut Terrace and 41 South Street. Both of those surveys are clear in that regard and demonstrate no intent to merge the lots. They don't even mention it at any point, nor do the initial permit applications. We do believe that they were that initial lot line was mistakenly omitted, and that is certainly on the surveyor, and that is something that they should have caught. But that failure to note the internal lot line should not itself be the basis of any sort of lot merger. There's been no municipal action to merge the lots. And as the appellant pointed out, somehow the lots may have merged. Somehow the lots merged. And there is nothing in the record to state that. There has been no explicit action to merge these lots. And as noted here, any sort of ambiguity that may be caused by these inaccurate surveys must be resolved in favor of the landowner. And this is a direct impact on Ms. Boix-Vives' right to use her property. The boundary line adjustments and any sort of determination here would not impact the appellant. Their lot line is set. This is essentially determining what steps Ms. Boix-Vives would have to take to convey or to otherwise develop her lot. And for those reasons, we support the affirmative determination, and we respectfully ask the board to uphold the affirmative determination. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Zach, I have a few questions on the boundary line adjustment map actually that's up on the screen right now. Can you see that?
Yes.
So I take your point that it, I take you to be saying that the adjustments didn't affect any of the internal boundary lines, but I think I disagree with that. If you look at this map, the adjustment, if there was a boundary line between those two closest points, between your position of where the boundary line was for 41 and 89, this adjustment that we're looking at actually would have changed that back line also. So your original line would have run from, I don't have the cursor, but the narrowest point on the left-hand side to the narrowest point on the upper right-hand side of those two former lots.
Jeff, are you talking about that corner pin between?
The two internal corner pins.
Yeah. Okay.
So you actually would have needed to, this adjustment would have required two boundary line adjustments.
Because you would have rotated that internal line.
Yeah. So you either were giving away a portion of a lot that wasn't identified, or your owner who developed this survey believed they were actually the same lot. And I guess I'm not sure I agree that we would interpret an ambiguity in a map in favor of the person who developed the map. So I think that's different than an ambiguity in the zoning ordinance. So I'm concerned by the record that these maps, when prepared for the benefit of your clients or former owner of the property, didn't show the line, but now you're arguing that there is a line there.
And so I certainly understand the point here, and you are indeed correct that I wouldn't necessarily say that that internal lot line was moved. It was extended slightly by this boundary line adjustment, but it didn't necessarily move one way or the other. There was just another, it appears to be about 15 feet added to it via the boundary line adjustment. And our position isn't that the survey itself and the ambiguity there requires a determination in favor of the landowner. It's the whole picture. It's the application of the subdivision requirement given the deed history and the zoning record, including these surveys. And taken as a whole, any sort of ambiguity as to whether or not a subdivision would be required to convey 89 Chestnut Terrace should indeed be resolved in favor of the landowner here, Ms. Boix-Vives.
Okay, on the deeds, there's mention of 4 parcels. Is there any evidence of the merger of 2 of those parcels into one? It seems like that would have had to have occurred twice. So
yes, and so those parcels, they were merged as a matter of law. In that initial conveyance, there were 4 parcels, 2 of which are the primary main parcels here, 89 Chestnut Terrace and 41 South Street. Both of those lots are large lots that have always been conforming with the minimum lot size requirements in the city of Burlington. If I'm not mistaken, the lots are about roughly 17,000 square feet for Chestnut Terrace and 13,000 square feet for 41 South Street. So well above the minimum requirements. Those other parcels were all, very small adjustments to the boundary line, essentially before there was a process for doing so. And so via the doctrine of automatic lot merger, those would have merged into the larger conforming and contiguous pieces of land, leaving the two lots that we have now, 89 Chestnut Terrace and 41 South Street. And that was our initial primary concern when looking at these lots. And we were able to confirm with Andy Michael, with the title insurance, that they agree with our assessment of this and would be willing to insure it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We have any members in the audience who'd like to speak on this application who haven't spoken already? Arline, you still have your hand up. Do you want to say anything further? No? You're on mute.
AJ, Mary Twitchell still needs to be called on.
I don't see her still with her hand up, but I guess maybe she'll put it up later. Arline, your hand is still up. Do you have anything to add?
Yes, AJ, if I could, I'm sorry, my dog is barking in the background.
It's okay. We're okay with that.
I guess what I'd like to point out to Jeff's point about the adjustment that 5, which was between his property and as it was applied for his immediate next door neighbor on South Street, it also touched on and affected the lot that is lot 89. And again, the zoning office didn't call that into question as not a simple 1 or 2 property boundary line adjustment, but something more complicated. And I think it just, again, repeatedly supports that it was 1 lot. And as for the non-conforming lot that's on the screen right now, the purple one, it touches on both lot 89 and the 41 South Street lot. And I'm not quite sure I know all the intricacies of the doctrine of automatic merger of non-conforming lots, but I'm not sure how you would know which lot this non-conforming lot merged with when it's touching 2 conforming lots, except that if it was 1 lot, the whole structure. And so I just, Mr. Boix-Vives repeatedly, in fact, starting in 1998, he recorded a survey that for reasons I can't figure out, that showed everything as 1 lot. And he repeatedly treated the property as 1 lot in the land records, in permitting, with the state subdivision permit, which has a condition in it that says there's only 1 building allowed on this entire lot, 1 lot. He took all those actions and to now change position, for Mrs. Boix-Vives to change position, it doesn't seem like it's equitable to neighbors. And it doesn't seem like you can change the position just because you want to. You treated it as 1 lot for a significant period of time. You took a number of actions. My title relies on those actions of it being 1 lot. And now because she wishes to sell that lot, she wants to undo that. And that doesn't seem to be, consistent with like good zoning or land use practices to just be able to switch that.
Okay.
AJ, can I ask a question?
By all means.
You just said your property depends on this being 1 lot. What did you mean by that?
What I mean is that the boundary line adjustment that was done for my property was done with 41 Chestnut Terrace, not 89 Chestnut Terrace, because there is no 89 Chestnut Terrace.
Right, but how does that impact your property?
I'm just saying it's in my title.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else who wants to speak on this application? Scott, I don't see any hands up. Do you?
No.
I see Gravel and Shea raise their hand again. Last
Yep.
word.
Thank you. I think to follow up on the appellant's comments here, one final point we'd like to make is that there has been no action to merge these lots. And it would be improper to base a lot merger based off of a survey that clearly caused a cascade of events, that the permits were issued and referenced lots improperly. There needs to be some sort of municipal action to explicitly merge the lots, or there needs to be a deed that demonstrates a clear and explicit intent to merge the lots. And none of that is present here. Thank you.
Can I ask one last question on the tax status of the parcels?
Yes.
Does the owner receive two separate tax bills for two separate parcels?
Yes. In our application materials, we had pointed that out. Our client here does indeed receive two tax bills and has for quite some time. Looking at the grand list, as far as it goes back, or as far as I was able to see, they've been taxed separately, and that would be something that would be a determinative that would help determine which lot that small purple parcel merged into. And the tax map shows that has been taxed as part of 89 Chestnut Terrace.
Okay. And has the owner ever sought any changes in the taxes paid, making an argument that one of the lots couldn't be developed, or that there were any restrictions or size limitations that would mean it should be taxed at a lower value, to your knowledge?
No, not to my knowledge. Our client has simply paid the taxes as they've been assessed on the two separate lots.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Twitchell, you had raised your hand earlier. You're on mute. Do you want to speak on this item? Five, four.
Maybe have her raise her hand again if she does. She may.
Yeah, Ms. Twitchell, do you want to speak? I mean, Scott promoted her.
Okay.
Yeah, pinged her to unmute, so I assume she's decided against it.
All right, well, then we will close the public hearing item on this agenda item. Okay, our last agenda item is ZSP 22-12, 284 Grove Street. It is a sketch plan to demolish 12 single-family modular homes and 1 3-unit apartment and construct 13 new duplex buildings along existing looped driveway at 284 Grove Street.
Scott, AJ, I'm going to be recused on this one.
Okay, this is sketch plan, and I understand we have the applicant here. We don't swear them in for sketch plan, right, Scott?
That is correct. And I'll point out there's one more item after this, AJ.
Oh, yeah. I forgot. It's on page 2. Joint institutional parking management plan, time extension request. So it's not our last. Well, Mr. O'Brien, I think you're here for this project. This is sketch plan. We've had a relatively long meeting tonight. We want to give you all the time you need. But the board does have some things to deliberate on. you know, I would ask you to be relatively direct in your presentation. And if there's specific items you have questions about, I would ask that you direct those to the board so we can get right into it. So go ahead.
Sure. Actually, it's Nick Smith presenting on behalf of Ireland Grocery Properties.
Okay.
And Patrick's here for support as needed. So again, really quickly, this is that loop driveway or loop private drive that's located at 284 Grove Street. This is just to the southeast of Bayberry, the recent developed project by SD Ireland. This is a separate parcel that it consists of 12 single-family modular homes and one 3-unit apartment building that's located within the interior of the loop. The modular homes are scattered throughout the loop here. What we're proposing at this time is due to the existing infrastructure, the existing building conditions, the deterioration is actually of these modular
Hi,
homes.
Nance. Hi, Dad. Are you done? Not really, no.
The demolition of the existing structures and the replacement with 13 new duplex units. So it would be total of 26 units here from the existing 15. And I believe, as we've shown in our narrative, the density allows this with the, taking into account that with the steep slope area between 15 and 30%, we receive conditional buildable area from that. The layout is generally more conforming to Bayberry development, with these duplex units facing along Grove Street rather than away from Grove Street towards the interior loop. And then the remaining units all facing the interior loop once you get into this development area. You can see from the plan there that we have detached garages that service the buildings along Grove Street, and then all the other units have attached garages. We have an internal drive that we're using to access the Grove Street unit so that there's no additional driveways coming off of Grove Street. And I think we are showing adequate parking for these types of units, which are likely to be all 2-bedroom units here. So I guess a few other things here. We're trying to make use of the existing infrastructure, including the sewer, stormwater, water systems. Water is served by South Burlington, actually, in this location from CWD. And as far as stormwater is concerned, everything currently just runs into catch basins and goes off into the ditch up to the to Page up left. So, and outlets down there. We're going to revamp the storm system with the new development so that we're actually detaining a portion of the water, infiltrating as much as possible, and then controlled release for the remainder.
So I want to.
Yep.
I don't think that's necessarily a big issue for sketch plan.
Sure. Yep.
I think there's something else that we should focus on. I read the staff report, and this is sketch plan, so this is feedback. I think you need to seriously consider the brick building.
Yeah, can we, I guess I'd like to discuss that, and I appreciate jumping straight into the point there. The existing brick building, I'd like to point out two things here, and I sent an email to Scott earlier today, but one of the issues was there was actually an incorrect statement on our end as far as the project narrative is concerned. This brick building, when originally researched, was eligible for state register, but it's actually not listed currently. So it's not historically listed on the state register at this point. This was reviewed with Act 250 back in 1998, I believe. And at that time, it was deemed that it would be eligible. It was never added. And since then, we've had 106 Associates review the building. There's been major deterioration, additions, removal of features with architectural significance. There's a full outline within the report provided by 106 Associates, which draws the conclusion that this building actually is no longer eligible. We're currently requesting a determination of eligibility for the structure, and we're slated for the January meeting to review that with the Vermont Architectural Board. So I understand that there are a lot of comments that are not necessarily answered within the staff report concerning this building and its historical nature, but I think as we continue through this process, it'll become evident that this building is no longer eligible. And since it's no longer eligible, we would, request the demolition of this building. There are obviously comments by the DAB on this, and at that time we had just received the report on this, so there was a lot of discussion around trying to retain either the total of the building or a portion of the building, but the report was not really thoroughly reviewed by the DAB since it was just supplied to them that day. So again, I would just request that we understand that there are still a lot of outstanding items that we need to review as far as this building is concerned, but we would push to table some of those comments because we think that this will no longer be eligible for state register.
Yeah, my point was I think you gotta be really prepared to address it. We're getting a lot of requests for demolition of historic buildings in the last year. And it's something that I think we've all been pushed on a lot of different ways. And the staff report notes it now. So be aware that it's something we're going to be looking at.
Yep, I think we understand that. And again, I think if we get into the report a little bit more here, we would see that, like I said, I won't repeat myself here necessarily, but there are also a number of other issues other than kind of the ones I glossed over as far as removal of architecturally significant features and things like that. There's a lot of deterioration on the building, including the brick and so forth. And there's been a lot of replacement as well. So. I guess I would take comment on that.
Just to echo AJ, I think we're going to look closely at this. It still looks like a very interesting building to me. How long have you all owned the property?
Yeah, the parcel was acquired by SD Ireland in, I believe, 2000. I don't have the exact year, but I believe early 2000s during the construction process from Scott Mansfield.
Well, I think if part of your argument is going to be about the condition of that building, we're going to look very carefully at whatever steps you have taken over the last 20 years to maintain that structure.
Yeah, and I think if you, again, sorry to jump in so quickly here, but if you do look into that report, you'll see kind of the last pages, there has been quite a significant number of improvements done by Ireland to shore up the building, including, a full poured basement walls to try and shore up structurally, among some other items. But again, yes, I can understand where you're getting at.
Yeah, okay.
I don't have a ton of feedback on the project. It seems, we need housing and it's nice to see improvement. Mine was on historic. I don't know what else the DRB wants to raise in this sketch plan. Members, anybody? Brad, Nick, Caitlin, Chase, anybody? Leo? Okay, well,
I mean, just to that comment there, sorry, AJ, before you let me off here, but
No, it's fine. If you have specific questions for us on other items,
Sure.
take a minute and ask them by all means.
I guess really I'll just kind of echo that, the location of this building. There was discussion on trying to retain this building and the location of this building and how it affects the grades in the areas around, and the utilization of that interior loop really would become a challenge, obviously. And I think the retainage of this building could end up being a project killer, essentially, of this nature. And, this is providing significant increase in housing, including inclusionary units. And I would point out that a lot of the existing modular units are at end of life, and they are vacant right now, and actually would require significant improvement to become livable again. So, we're not only are we losing, are we down 15? Well, I would say we're down a few of these units currently. We're also not, by kind of limiting ourselves here, we're going to lose out on 26 units. But I just would point that out as well.
Okay. Can't say anything about it, but I hear you. I understand the argument.
Yep. I appreciate that. As far as, I guess the only other thing I would ask from the board is, the utilization of the existing infrastructure. I think it makes sense. I don't know if there's any feedback on that. The siting, obviously the building is within the setbacks along Grove Street. I assume that approaches what the board is interested in and meets the regulations. And, other than that, I don't know if we, if we were expecting too many comments, because we think that this is, unless there's something that catches the board's eye, we think this would be, a vast improvement. So.
Yeah. Yep. I hear you. I mean, it's nice to see housing. I like the general design. It's nice to see duplexes. I think we're going to look closely at the historic demolition that was part of this. So, with that, I'll close the sketch plan.
Public comment, AJ?
I didn't see anybody with their hand. Do we take public comment on sketch plan, Scott?
Yep.
We do.
We do.
Is there anybody in the public who wants to speak on this one?
If so, raise your hand. It prompted me to ask AJ because I saw Sharon Busher, who spoke to this item before, but she's gone.
She's gone. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we have one more item on our agenda, other business, a joint institutional parking management plan extension of time. I suppose this couldn't be part of our consent agenda, but it seems relatively straightforward.
I had one question on it, AJ.
Okay, then Scott, do we call a hearing for other business, or what do we do? It's not listed as public hearing, so here's what I'm going to do. Do we have the applicant here?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Thibault, can you just briefly explain what you're asking for? This is other business. I don't think we need to warn it as a public hearing at this time. We're not taking testimony.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Sandy Thibault, Executive Director at CATMA. And we had submitted a request for a 6-month extension for our 2-year joint institution parking plan that was submitted back in December or spring 2020. Well, actually, it was, I'm sorry, approved December 1st, 2020. Sorry. And it was approved for 2 years. It typically is a 5-year plan, and it was approved for 2 years. We wanted to collect some more data to really understand what travel behavior was like during COVID and post-COVID, the impact of telework and commuting, and obviously, the data that will impact the parking demand estimates. So we filed the report, DRP approved it for 2 years, and we are asking for a 6-month extension, partly in light of the current ordinance update in progress.
Kayla, what was your question?
I guess the question that I had, Scott, in your memo on this, you said that the ordinance that goes into effect next year includes the provision for a 6-month extension. Does that mean there's not a provision currently for the 6-month extension?
That's like a trick question. What's in the adopted CDO for these plans? There isn't an express provision for 6-month extension. What's been warned for hearing with the city council for adoption, and therefore in effect, does include that. And so they've requested the extension while that amendment is effective pending adoption by the council.
Okay. I think just a comment that I would make is, at the time of the 2-year approval, I understand historically it has been approved on 5 years, but the ordinance doesn't guarantee a 5-year. It says up to 5 years. So I just wanted to make that point of clarification. That was my only question, AJ.
Okay. All right. So, but no issue with that doesn't, I don't think, affect the 6-month extension at this time. Is it 6 months that we're specifically seeking?
6 months, yes.
Yes, Scott answered my question, and I do not have an issue with the 6-month extension.
So I would move that under our other business item, we grant the extension requested to the extent we need to do that.
Second.
Jeff, second. All those in favor? All right, you have your extension.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So with that, I will close the Development and Review Board meeting for Tuesday, December 20th, and raise to the board what it wants to do.